Has there been more than one UFO crash? So many people know about Roswell, New Mexico, but have there been other crashes? If so, then why have they occurred? If aliens are thousands or even million years ahead of us technically, then how can they somehow not be able to avoid the ground? We do know from our own experience that technology is not perfect. There is part fatigue. There are design issues. There are environmental concerns. And there are many other problems, many not anticipated when something is developed. However, tried and true technology or older technology tends to have less problems. Lots of experience will eventually work out the bugs. But are extraterrestrials prone to making the same mistakes like us? Whatever the case, there has been more than one crash of unidentified objects. The crash list is shown below. This is the most well-known crash of an unidentified craft. It took place over a number of days. Before it went down on July 4th, it was witnessed by William Woody and his father. A day or two after it crashed, they went to look where it went down, but every time they tried to get off the main road onto a dirt road or a side road, they were stopped by the military. Apparently, the U.S. military had tracked the object on radar. When the military arrived at the crash site, they found a damaged craft with 5 small bodies lying on the ground. They moved all of it to the Roswell Army Airfield. Glenn Dennis was one person who realized what can happen when you go a little too far into a military base and when you see too much. When a military officer caught him, he threatened him, saying that they were going to find his bones in the desert. Dennis was a mortician from the Ballard Funeral Home. He was called to supply small caskets. This all happened on July 5th, and it was the same day that Mark Brazel found the metallic debris on his ranch. He brought some of the larger pieces on the next day to the sheriff, who contacted Major Jesse Marcel. This all led to the famous Roswell Daily Record headline on July 8th stating that the Army airfield had captured a flying saucer. The following day, a picture of Jesse Marcel was published with him holding debris from a weather balloon. The military retracted the story. The craft, the debris, and the bodies were flown on July 8th to Fort Worth Army Airfield and then finally to Wright-Patterson. Marcel claimed the debris had been switched, so when he gave his story on July 9th, the actual wreckage was on its way to Wright Field. This incident was first brought to the attention of UFO author Raymond Fowler. He interviewed the witness Fritz Werner. This was not his actual name, since obviously he didn't want to give his real identity considering what he revealed on that day. It was confirmed that he was a graduate engineer. He also had 2 other degrees in both physics and mathematics. He had been employed by the Air Force and had been assigned to Project Blue Book. The story he told Fowler was incredible. He got a call one day from his boss informing him that he was now on a special assignment. He was instructed to fly to Phoenix, Arizona. There, he boarded a bus with blacked out windows. There were others on the bus. They were warned not to talk to each other, especially after the assignment, when they were going to be returned to Phoenix. They drove for 4 hours until they reached an area somewhere near Kingman, Arizona. When they left the bus, they found themselves looking at some kind of saucer-looking craft illuminated by spotlights. There were military personnel everywhere, including military police. Despite the presence of a trench in the desert ground that indicated a rough landing, the craft seemed undamaged. The hatch was open, and they were informed that it opened on impact, ejecting the pilot. There was a tent nearby that housed the body. When Werner got a glimpse of it, he was shocked because it was not human. Everyone had a particular task to perform. Werner's assignment was to examine the compression of the dirt in the trench to estimate the speed of impact. All of the assigned people were debriefed and then returned to Phoenix. For Fowler, he had doubts about the story. Werner was the only witness, but after further digging, the author was able to find other witnesses that confirmed Werner's incredible narrative. It all began when Ibrahim Sued of the newspaper O Globo received a package. The letter inside had an incredible story. The writer related an account when he and his friends were fishing on a lake near Ubatuba. They spotted a disc-shaped object flying close to the ground. It seemed to be in trouble. It was traveling at high speed toward the beach, and it looked like it was about to hit the water when it suddenly shot up in the sky. It then exploded. The witness said the burning fragments were very bright, even though it was almost noon. Most of the fragments landed in the water, but a few landed on the beach. The writer included a couple of them in the package sent to the newspaper. Olivo Fontes, a medical doctor and member of the UFO organization, read the article in the paper and wanted to meet Sued. When they met Sued, they agreed to hand the samples over to Fontes, where he then submitted them for testing at labs in both Brazil and in the United States. What they found was interesting. The fragments were composed of a highly pure form of magnesium, but in a number of cases, the density of the material didn't exactly match the density of magnesium. None of the lab tests could confirm any impurities until a sample was sent to a testing facility in Midland, Michigan, where they discovered the presence of strontium. This element is not used or is an impurity of any terrestrial production method for magnesium. Unfortunately, the labs in Brazil, controlled by the military, destroyed the largest and best fragment of the 3 samples. The whereabouts of the second and third samples are unknown. There is no mention of who is holding them right now. Finally, the chain of evidence or custody was broken, since the signature on the letter was unreadable. Since the witness could not be contacted, does this put this claim in doubt? This is an interesting case where before the object went down in Las Vegas, it was first sighted on the opposite side of the country, in the state of New York. It was first sighted over Oneida, New York, traveling west. Next, it was observed in Kansas and Colorado. In Eureka and Nelphi, Utah, an extremely bright object was seen close to the ground until it moved off. Reno, Nevada picked it up next until it went to its final destination, Las Vegas. It was tracked on radar at Nellis Air Force Base, but disappeared at 10,000 feet. Witnesses in Las Vegas reported an airborne explosion. This could have been mistaken with fighter aircraft chasing the object, since the North American Air Defense Command in Colorado Springs had been tracking the object's movement across the country. Captain Gordon Shields, who was piloting a C-119 at the time, briefly sighted the object as it passed by. It was slender in shape. It was glowing bright yellow in the aft section while glowing bright white in the front. Shields mentioned that the bright white glow at the front of the craft looked like a magnesium fire. But despite the brightness of the object, Shields noticed no exhaust or smoke trail. On the ground, a number of witnesses saw the object as it descended. 2 of them in Nelphi, Bob Robertson and Floyd Evans, watched as the craft approached and flew no more than 500 feet above them. They had gotten out of their truck at the time when they sighted it, but dove underneath their vehicle when it roared overhead. It seemed to slow down as if it was taking a look at them, but then proceeded on. Even despite the bright glow around the object, they said they still could just barely make out a row of windows. They also noticed that their truck lights dimmed and the engine began to run roughly. The final destination of Las Vegas is where the object supposedly exploded. Some say they saw a flash in the mountains. Was it the sonic boom of jet aircraft? Or was the craft taken down by the aircraft? Or was the unknown craft simply in trouble and eventually went down on its own? Or was it a combination of both? If it did go down, we will probably never know, since the military had been tracking the object since it was first sighted in New York, and probably they were ready to immediately retrieve it. Other than the Roswell crash, this is probably one of the most well-known crashes of an unidentified craft. It first appeared as a fireball over southern Canada in the late afternoon. It was seen by many witnesses in Michigan and Ohio. As it headed toward Ohio, it was already observed changing course. Then it made its last course change when it headed into Pennsylvania. At 4:47 p.m., it crashed in a wooded area near Kecksburg. Not only were there reports across Ohio and Michigan, but there also were fires attributed to molten debris falling from the object. These fires occurred in both of these states. After the crash, police and firefighters were called as smoke was seen rising up from the crash site. Before the Army secured the area, one of the first responders on the scene was a volunteer firefighter, Jim Romansky. He found the object deep in the woods. It had cut a trench in the dirt when it came down at a shallow angle. It was acorn-shaped, roughly 12 feet in diameter at its base. On the same base section, Romansky noticed a gold band with unusual symbols or writing. There was no signs of any kind of propulsion. There has been speculation that this was a Soviet space probe or satellite that came down, but Romansky noticed no welds or seams and it was undamaged with the exception of a dent in the metal. Man-made spacecraft don't remain intact in any way when they come down. The U.S. military eventually secured the area and removed the object. The event that took place on that day was not actually a crash. It occurred in Puget Sound. Harold Dahl was on his boat along with his 15-year-old son, 2 crewmen, and his dog. Early in the afternoon, they noticed 6 donut-shaped craft. One of them seemed to be in trouble, and it looked as if it was about to crash on the water. Suddenly, it started to eject molten metallic debris into the water and onto the beach. Some of it hit and damaged Harold's boat. It also hit his son, breaking his arm, and it also hit his dog, killing it. The craft shuddered, but then regained altitude as the mass ejection seemed to work. The craft sped off, surrounded by the other 5. Now this bizarre story continued long after the sighting. 2 intelligence officers got wind of what happened in Puget Sound. They ended up taking a box of the debris fragments with them. While flying back to Hamilton Field in California, the B-25 that they were flying crashed in a remote area near Kelso, Washington. There is only speculation that the debris somehow caused the fire that brought down the aircraft. These are only summaries of these crash events, and they only touch the surface of what really happened. For example, in Kecksburg, many other witnesses other than the first responders ventured into the forest that night to get a glimpse of the bell-shaped object. Still, why did events like this occur so often? Why have there been so many crashes? Some have claimed that the Air Force had an aircraft-based pulse weapon that could knock these objects out of the sky. There have been other claims that our radar was harmful to them. Whatever the case, we probably will never know the answers.